This happened around a decade ago to me and one of my best friends at the time. His name is Nelson. We met in college in our first year, and we were pretty close right from the start. He and I decided to go to Pensacola, Florida, on vacation for the winter holidays one year. We were living in Lansing, Michigan, so it would be a long drive for us. My dad had given me an old Ford hatchback as a high school graduation present, and we were going to use that for the road trip. The car was missing the back seat, but it still ran well enough for a long drive. We planned to stay at an Airbnb when we got there, and we had everything planned out in advance. On the way there, we had a great time, and the trip went smoothly. This story, however, happened on the way back. I drove the whole way there because Nelson was not experienced behind the wheel. However, I decided to let him drive on the way back since I was getting tired. At first, he was cautious and everything seemed fine, but partway through the first day, he started to get more comfortable. Nelson began speeding and driving recklessly. I told him to tone it down, but he just laughed it off and kept going. It didn't take long before another car honked at us. Nelson found this funny for some reason and responded by giving the guy the finger. I could see the other driver's face, and he was furious. The situation quickly escalated. The car began chasing us, and it became clear that the driver was not messing around. It was a full-on road rage incident. What also bothered me was that Nelson seemed to see the whole thing as a joke, even though there was a crazy guy chasing us, almost ramming into my car. I kept trying to wave at the guy politely to calm him down, but I don't know if that helped. This other car was right on our tail, just inches away from ramming us. Then he pulled up beside our car and held up a gun. He didn't point it at us, but just showed it to us, like he was just trying to scare us. As soon as I saw that, I told Nelson to stop the car, hoping that if we stopped, the other guy might leave us alone and keep going, and maybe then he would feel like he had won. Nelson didn't want to at first because I think he didn't see the gun, but when I told him what I'd seen, he pulled over to the side of the road. To my horror, the other car stopped too, and the driver got out, still holding the gun. As soon as I saw that, I dialed 911 and told the operator what was happening. I tried to explain our location, but in the heat of the moment, I couldn't remember exactly where we were. Nelson looked terrified for the first time. Up until then, he was still laughing and thinking it was just a joke. The man with the gun approached our car, shouting angrily. He pointed the gun directly at us, and I prayed that the police would arrive soon. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. Nelson and I barely spoke, both of us too scared to do anything that might escalate the situation further. We both kept our eyes down and didn't make eye contact with the guy, but we could still hear him shouting. Finally, we heard police cars coming, and they surrounded the area. When I heard the cop cars pull up, I looked out and saw them arrest the guy, who still had his gun out. Only then did I start to breathe again. One of the officers approached us and asked us to step out of the car. We did so, and then the police asked us some questions. Nelson admitted to what he had done, provoking the other driver. Lucky for us, that wasn't illegal at all, so they let us go. I was angry at Nelson for provoking the whole thing, though I warned him many times, but he still brought this upon us. As we got back in the car, I couldn't hold back anymore, so I laid into him. "What were you thinking?" I snapped. "You could have gotten us killed." Nelson looked down, clearly feeling guilty. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't think it would go that far." I drove the rest of the way home, and we barely talked for the rest of the time that we were on the road. After that trip, Nelson and I stopped hanging out as much. I guess I never really forgave him for what he did that day. There were some other things that happened too, but this was the beginning of the end. We almost died, and to be honest, I really blamed him. I was working nights when I was in my early 20s. It was a few years after high school, but I was still living in the suburbs with my parents, which is where I grew up. My job was at a fast food joint downtown in our city. It would close at midnight, so I would always borrow my mom's car to make the drive that way. Nobody would have to stay up late to pick me up once I was done for the night. I said goodbye to my coworker and walked to the car across the parking lot. It would be about a 40-minute drive with no traffic, so I knew I had to stay awake for a while on the way. I filled up the car at a gas station and also picked up a coffee for the drive. I was tired as I drove, but the caffeine was helping. I was able to keep it together on the highway, and eventually I took the exit to my neighborhood. I was almost home. The streets were quiet, with only a few porch lights flickering in the distance. Nobody stayed up very late around there, so I was mostly alone on the street. As I approached the road leading to my house, I noticed something strange. A man was hopping over fences in people's yards. At first, I didn't know if it was real or if it was my tired mind playing tricks on me. I slowed the car and squinted to make sure I wasn't seeing things. He was definitely there, in one of the backyards, but then I saw him duck behind a fence, out of my sight. I pulled over to the side of the road, parking under a streetlight, keeping my eyes on where I had seen him. I grabbed my phone and called the police. When I was talking to them, I looked away from the spot. After no more than a minute, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. A man was approaching my car fast. Before I could react, he was at my window, banging on it with his fists. He looked angry. I was still on the phone with the cops, and I blurted out what was happening in real time. The man continued to pound on my window. He kept shouting for me to open the door. The noise was loud, making it hard to concentrate on my conversation with the police. They asked for my location, and I quickly gave them the details. I was only 5 minutes away from home, so I knew the area well. They told me to stay put, but that didn't make much sense to me. I'm not sure if the operator understood what was happening. I had no intention of staying there with a crazy guy banging on my car. For all I knew, he was armed. I knew I had to get out of there, so I told the operator that I needed to move. Then I put my phone down. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, but finally, I managed to start the car. I glanced one last time at the man, who was now trying to look inside my car, his face pressed against the glass. I put the car in drive and hit the gas, pulling away from the curb. As soon as I started to accelerate, I heard a loud bang from where the man was standing. For a split second, I thought it might be a gunshot. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to put distance between myself and the man. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the man chasing after my car, but he was nowhere in sight. Even if he tried to follow me, he wouldn't have been fast enough on foot. Even still, I was too scared that I would lead him back to my house, so I didn't go home right away. There was a gas station about 10 minutes down the road, so I went there instead. After parking next to the front entrance, I got out of my car and went to check what kind of damage was done. When I got to the back, I saw that the window was shattered, with a spider web of cracks radiating from a central point, but it hadn't completely broken through. I looked closely for a bullet hole, but there wasn't one. It must have just been a hard hit from something like a hammer or a rock. Then I went back into my car to check if the police were still on the line. I put my phone down when I started driving, but never hung up. I gave them an update and told them where I was. I stayed parked near the entrance and waited for the police. The area was well lit, and a few other cars were parked there too, making me feel somewhat safer. It wasn't long before I saw a cop car coming down the road. The police didn't come there often, so I knew it was for me right away. I got out and waved the car over. They came over to me, and I repeated my story, just so they could have all the details. After that, they took off to look for the man. I stayed at the gas station while the police checked. After about 30 minutes, they returned and told me they hadn't found anyone matching the description I gave them. They told me to go home and call immediately if I saw anything suspicious again. Driving home, I was on high alert, but the rest of the trip was uneventful. I parked in my driveway, took a deep breath, and went inside, double-checking that all the doors and windows were locked. Later, I found out from a neighbor that there had been some robberies that night around where I saw the man. It doesn't take a genius to piece that together. The police caught him a few days later because one of the houses had a security camera that got his face. Although the experience was terrifying, I was grateful it had ended without anyone getting hurt. In early March of 2013, my husband and I were driving back from a marriage retreat that had been held at the Hyatt Regency in Lake Tahoe. Spring approached slowly, so snow still blanketed the Sierra Nevadas. We dressed in coats and boots when we ventured outside of our hotel during the retreat. Still, with the snow thawing out slowly, we enjoyed viewing the occasional greenish foliage peeking out from the thick layer of snow among the tree lines and the towering embankments of the Sierras. It made for perfect landscape pictures, the kind you may find on desk calendars or stock photos sold online. We had enjoyed the marriage retreat and relished in the experience of staying at a 5-star hotel. Now we were given the privilege to drive through the most breathtaking parts of the Sierras, a final treat as we headed home and back to the work week. Therefore, we had to take pictures, or rather, my husband had to. Not that I don't enjoy a photo or two. I do, but he always insists on a picture of us and a picture of me. And I'm not photogenic. Whenever we traveled, he would stop the car, get out to take photos, and subject us to ugly pictures of ourselves. Fortunately, we would get the occasional gold nugget of a photo, and that's what he was striving for on our trip down the mountain that day, so I obliged, allowing him to relish in his photo-taking of the landscape, of him and of me, even though I was pretty sure I looked atrocious. There were several vista points and turnoffs along Highway 80 for picture-taking. We just had to be cautious when pulling off the highway since the road twisted around cliffs and embankments. Even though weather conditions didn't require snow chains this particular weekend, we knew the roads could still be dangerous and slippery. Some of these vista points were just off the side of the highway, but these points could appear quickly when we drove around a bend. We didn't want to take the chance of sliding across the road in an attempt to stop. Other vista points required us to actually exit the highway and drive a short distance away, and these were more plausible for my husband's photo escapades. We took one such exit on our descent through the mountains. The exit took us on a short road that dipped under the highway and over to a clearing with a field bristling with bushes. To avoid the foliage, with the Sierra Mountains in the background, it created a striking contrast of snow-covered mountains against the blue sky. We could still see the highway to our left, a good 500 yards away, but if we angled our phones away from the highway, we could still capture the beauty of nature in all its glory. Better yet, elements of spring revealed themselves with slightly warmer temperatures, so we could take photos without multiple layers of clothing. So we pulled the car to the shoulder, got out, and walked down a slight embankment to get a better photo. I took a picture of my husband, and he took one of me. As we walked back up the embankment toward our car, we heard a loud noise that sounded like a car's motor in the distance. I turned and saw a dark-colored Porsche zoom down the highway. It pulled off the exit we had just taken, tore down the road right in front of us, then stopped behind our car on the shoulder. It was almost as if the driver was in a hurry to get where he was going. I didn't know, but I figured that the driver had stopped quickly to enjoy the scenery as we did, maybe to snap a photo for himself before rushing to his next rendezvous. Instead, the driver got out of his car and asked us if he could take our picture. What struck me about this younger dude, from a distance, was his appearance. He looked homeless and eccentric, like one of those guys living on the beach, dressed in worn-out clothes with holes in his pants. He sported a grunge-like look with brownish, shaggy hair, the beginnings of a beard, and a plaid shirt. But as we walked up to him, we got a closer look and noticed that he was clean, despite his grungy look. I got the impression that he was a rich kid in his 20s, perhaps someone donning the messy look as his own outcry against society. But getting back to the scene, as we headed back up the embankment toward our car, he asked in a friendly voice, "Hey guys, would you like a picture?" It wasn't abnormal for us to hear that. Often, when you're taking pictures on vacation, you may ask other tourists to take a photo of yourself, and someone walking by may offer their photo-taking services. This exchange took a matter of a few seconds, so we both said, "Sure," and handed him my phone for pictures. We were the only ones on the road other than this guy, and apparently his girlfriend, who sat hidden in the shadows. She was still in the passenger seat of the Porsche and didn't move an inch. By the time the grunge dude had us take a few steps back down the embankment for the picture, my dumb brain finally kicked in and said, "Hey, Something's off here. But by then, he had already stepped back toward his car, taking several pictures of us from my phone as we grinned for the photos. We stood on edge. I was wondering if he would take this opportunity to take off with my phone, jump in his car, and speed off. Uneasiness came over me as he continued taking photos, stepping backward, closer to his car. A scene from National Lampoon's European Vacation popped into my mind. One featuring a nice man offering to take a video of the Griswolds, characters who had newly arrived in France or Germany or some European country. The Griswolds naively accepted the offer, and the nice old man encouraged them to take off their shoes and stand knee-deep in a plaza fountain for a better video shot. Then the man ran off with their video camera instead. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about how much of an idiot I was for letting this guy take my phone to supposedly take pictures. But when he took one last step toward his car, my husband abruptly took a few steps up the embankment, reached forward, and quickly took my phone from the man's hands. Thank you, that's good. Those photos will work," he said, laughing off the awkwardness. I joined my husband at his side, and we waved at the grunge dude's passenger, who made no effort to look our way. I think my husband even asked if they wanted a picture, but the grunge dude declined. He said his goodbyes to us, got back in his car, made a U-turn, and left. And the bizarre thing was that when the grunge dude originally got off the highway and parked behind us, he'd been driving westbound on Highway 80. That's the same direction we were going. But now we watched as his car tore up the road from us and jumped back onto Highway 80. He was heading eastbound, back toward Lake Tahoe, at the same robust speed as when he had made his appearance. Why had he done this, only to turn around? What was the point of taking our photos and then returning from where he'd come? What was he planning with us, and what had deterred him from going through with it? And why hadn't his female companion said anything? Why did he come and leave with such urgency, taking off quickly? We noted how bizarre this was, but at least the uneasiness had waned, and I now had my phone safely with me. We got back in our car and continued westbound on the highway, still not sure what to make of this. We pushed that out of our minds as we continued to drive down the mountain, maneuvering the twisting, bending roads and admiring the nature around us. But about 20 or so minutes later, the uneasiness returned when we came upon a car accident just around the bend. An upside-down SUV had crashed into the steep cliff to our right. Transit authority and state trooper vehicles tended to the driver while making sure we passed through safely. The accident is unrelated, but something about this and our encounter with the strange grunge dude made us uneasy, tainting the atmosphere, and this unsettling feeling lingered even as we and other vehicles passed the accident scene slowly. I don't remember if I saw the driver or an ambulance, but I knew the accident was bad if the vehicle had overturned. The unsettling feeling remained with us during the rest of our 3-hour trip back home, but nothing else came out of it, so in the end, it was anticlimactic. Still, the encounter with the grunge dude stuck with us. My husband later said that he had a flashing thought that the guy may pull out a gun. I wondered if he was a thief, and maybe, for whatever reason, decided not to take our phone or valuables. Or a later thought that came was this: what if he wasn't there for malicious reasons, but perhaps a divine intervention? It wasn't that long after our encounter that we happened to stumble on that car accident. Had his picture taking delayed us enough to avoid getting caught in the accident and flipping over ourselves? Or maybe that's my imagination gone wild. Still, the bizarre encounter always remains.